Khalsa, Vaheguru Fateh. My name is Loveleen Kaur, and I come from Toronto, so thank you to everyone for having me. And not Brampton, Mississauga. So today I'm going to be talking about Sikh marriage in the diaspora, but sort of inadvertently. I'm going to start with my story. So I was helping my mom go through some papers a couple of weeks ago, and I found this, which you see in front of you. And I was shocked. This is my parents' marriage certificate. And it says that they're married as Hindus. And one thing that I particularly want to point out is the date of their marriage, which is 1985, 1 year after, or, after the Sikh genocide, and also particularly to the fact that Singh and Kaur are still explicitly written in the names of the people that are getting married and the location of the marriage, which is Punjab. And again, over and over again, it's mentioned that it's, I don't know if you can see my arrow. Can you see it when I'm doing it? Okay, cool. So again, it's mentioned the Hindu marriage registrar, the Hindu marriage registrar, again, down here. And I was particularly shocked because my identity has been shaped by my parents. And I often, talking to my friends, talk about my parents as my meaty peaty, right? And their identity has been shaped by their connection to Sikhi. And many of our identities have been shaped by recent political implications of being Sikhs after 1984. And I just could not comprehend the fact that since 1955, Sikhs have been being married as Hindus, which would mean I myself am a Hindu. And this made me question lots of things, right? And to me, the biggest importance is of our own identity construction. And as the diaspora, what are the cultures, traditions, customs that we have brought over? And what are the implications of something like the Hindu Marriage Act? And for me, it became particularly important because the GTA youth, and I'm only speaking from Toronto, and I know there's tons of stuff happening everywhere else, have been particularly active in mobilizing around educating young people about the impacts of 1984 to today, to the second generation who are one step removed from the trauma. So how can we be so focused on, protesting against Kamal Nath or trying to get the genocide recognized or fighting against Ujjwal Dosanjh, who is calling Sikhs the second generation of extremists, even though we're born here, when implicitly through different situations, and one example of the Hindu Marriage Act, we are already defined. So how can we expect a genocide to be recognized when we aren't recognized as an individual people from our home nation? And how can multicultural nations such as the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada be expected to recognize the Sikh people or the Sikh genocide when the home nation does not recognize the Sikhs as a people? So, and this also comes in some sense of, comedy, because I'm coming of age, and, the whispers in my family have started that kudi da vyah karana, padhai kar li, job kar rahi hai, paise hai gaya. And for me, it's always about optics. And every time you go to a Sikh marriage, you start seeing things. And there's always things that just irked me, that I didn't understand. And I've become more and more hypersensitive because, of course, Bua says, tere vyah te aa karna, Masi says, tere vyah te oh karna, and I start thinking, why, right? And an example of the story is we were doing Jaggo in Calgary, and we're standing out there, and there's wax falling on our suits, and we're like, what the hell? Why are we standing out here? We're done. The Jaggo's done. And we're waiting for my Masi, who didn't herself know these customs, had to come and put tail on the garage. And we were like, what the hell, right? Even my Masi herself didn't know she had to do this, but elders in the community were like, you have to do this, have to do the oil thing, it's bad luck. So for me, I started thinking, again, the implications of, the dominant hegemonic Hindu culture telling us what we belong to, and how has this hybridized our culture, our society, our customs, our traditions, and our rituals. So my paper revolves around a lot just questioning, to get people to start thinking, to really examine everything as the gurus taught us to do, and not accept things just because, right? And, And I saw when I would, go to marriages, which I think many people saw, is an image like this, right? Men may not, but most women I speak to always wonder, why does the woman walk behind the man? Why? And nobody can ever give you an answer, unless, of course, there's certain Jakara. But, and then you also wonder, why the red? Why the spalla? Why the father has to give it to the hand of the woman as if it's some sort of Christian ritual where the man belongs, the father has to pass on the woman as a piece of property to the next man, her husband, right? And then there's also the act of the brothers passing around the woman because she is not capable of walking around. There's that act of being somber, of sadness, of the, gungered, right? It's just like, I don't get it. I mean, I can understand in Punjab where a woman was leaving for, forever sometimes and never seeing her family ever again. But it's like, Ma, I'm moving 5 blocks down the street. Like, I'm going to be happy. And, why go around in a circle? I've had discussions with friends who sometimes say, if I'm connecting with Waheguru, I want to hold the hand of the person that I'm marrying and just meditate on the shabds. Why focus on, okay, 1 step, 2 step, oh shoot, I'm going too fast, almost walked into my husband, or walked too fast and you're standing there too long and you got a month to take now, and all this crazy shenanigans, right? So, And so when I myself was raised with bedtime stories of sovereignty and fighting for other people, I wonder to myself, have we been ignoring the epistemological violence that's still being committed on the Sikhs everywhere around the world? And has the Sikh diaspora internalized this epistemological violence without even recognizing that this is what we're doing? And because we live in multicultural nations, we live in nations where our political identities have been thrown out the window, and we celebrate the foods and the dresses and the music. And because of this, we want to celebrate our weddings because we have this opportunity to show the world, like, look at our amazing culture. But in the grand opulence of things and in the wanting to celebrate, have we moved away from Sikh spirituality and Sikh tradition and Sikh customs? So focusing on the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, it legally incorporates Sikhs into the dominant hegemonic culture. And India, as a diverse, pluralist, post-colonial society that is working to assimilate all those that resist its amazing, largest democracy, hypocrisy in the world, there's active political acts of assimilation to these groups, right? And this becomes reflective in cultural and social practices. And marriage around the world has now become an apolitical institution, right? Except, of course, when you talk about gay marriage. And Sikhs now, in order to repeal this act or anything else to do with Sikh identity, have to authenticate their identity. And if you have these conversations with Sikhs themselves, we all of a sudden get into these discussions of how to authenticate our identities. And I want to bring it back to the fact that why is the state defining for Sikhs who we are? We've always known. So just quickly outlining, the Sikh Research Institute put out something that stated that the first instance of Sikh marriage was the fact that Guru Nanak Dev Ji wrote Ek Onkar on a piece of paper and walked around it with his wife. Some debate that that may or may not have happened, but that is an instance just reflecting on the political action of marriage. Because Ek Onkar on a paper, the concept of that is you are accepting the fact that there is oneness and in the universe, and Guru Nanak Dev Ji himself was resisting dominant, hegemonic, oppressive cultures. So, and even there's a story that he was getting assassinated. There was an attempted assassination on his wedding day because he was resisting. And the second story is that there was Randhawa, and he was trying to get his daughter wed by some Hindu officials. And Randhawa was actually excommunicated from Hinduism because anybody who was a follower of Guru Amar Das Ji was no longer considered a Hindu. Ironic, right? Because we were no longer considered Hindus, but now all of a sudden you're trying to bring us back into the fold. So Guru Amar Das Ji sent his son-in-law, soon to be the fourth Guru, Guru Ram Das Ji, to officiate the ceremony of Randhawa's daughter. That, again, was a political instance, an instance of resistance for Sikh marriage. Because we were saying that we are the followers of the Gurus, and we need something that creates some sort of distinction. And Guru Ram Das Ji formally composed the lamas that have now become to be known as the Shabads that are read during the Anand Karj ceremony. And he also created the different ceremonies such for birth, marriage, and death that became instances of distinct identity for Sikhs. And again, a very political institutions, because no longer is it the fire or a specific Hindu ceremony, they are direct, distinct identities in correlation to something that already exists. So those are three acts during the Guru's times. Whether or not they happened, the fact that the storytelling is how it exists, is that they're acts of political resistance. So why is it that Sikh marriage falls into the fold of the capitalist understanding of the apolitical marriage, when that was never what it was supposed to be? And so even in Sikh scripture, in the Guru Granth Sahib, Sikh marriage, and during the Lama especially, is talked about one light in two bodies, two people connecting to the essence of Vaheguru, right? And so we are not bound to any legal or social authorities. So in one sense, you would say that, well, if we're not bound to any legal or social authorities, then this doesn't matter, right? But at the same time, we have a responsibility to say, you know, personally, I'm never going to sign a marriage certificate because no government has the right over me. And so we have to ask, what does this mean? And the only instance of where any sort of customs are written out about the rituals of Sikh marriage are in the Sikh Rahat Maryada. And that is the only place that we can base a lot of our understanding. And even in the Sikh Rahat Maryada, where the Anand Karj is outlined, it's a very simple ceremony, and they discuss the going around of the Guru Granth Sahib while singing the Shabds of the Lama. And that's it. And some would argue that this is reflective of the Guru's sort of understanding of the patrilineal hierarchical societies that we live in. And such a simplistic, beautiful ceremony actually was extinguishing social hierarchies. Again, resistance against dominant forces. And it just was reflective of the very essence of Sikhi. Okay, so going to the Anand Marriage Act. So I never knew about this when I originally started the paper. So it kind of threw me a curveball when I started the paper. But I thought it was particularly interesting. So after the fall of the Sikh Empire during British colonial rule and Hindu domination within Sikh institutions became particularly evident. And 1875 saw the creation of the Arya Samaj, which was actively trying to argue the fact that Sikhs were in fact just another branch of Hinduism. And under British colonial rule, they placed governance of Sikh Gurdwaras to Mahants, who started shifting a lot of the practices and started bringing in rituals that the gurus had long said, we don't believe in these things, such as deity worship and such things like that. And that's where Singh Sabhas started getting created around Lahore and Amritsar and whatnot. And they were aimed at recapturing the original message of the gurus and recovering and reestablishing the identity. And so I think yesterday we talked about Bhai Khan Singh Nabha, who published Hum Hindu Nahi, to assert the distinct identities of Sikhs by outlining the differences between scriptures, society, rituals, and belief systems. So they actually actively tried to find a way that we could go towards more simpler traditions that were more in line with Sikhi. So the Anand Garaj actually comes from what I was able to find, but if anybody wants to enlighten me, I'd love to hear it, is that it comes from their understanding of what they thought the marriage would be more reflective of. And this was, again, an instance of resistance against the Mahants who had taken over the Gurdwaras. And it was also reflective of when people were living in missals, anybody had access to doing lama, right? You carried the Guru Granth Sahib with you, and you didn't need a Gurdwara, you didn't need to sign a paper to do this extremely accessible ceremony that every Sikh should be able to partake in if they wanted. So there was a lot of lobbying and a lot of action on behalf of Sikhs across India and outside of India, where in 1909, the British actually implemented the Anand Marriage Act, which I thought was shocking because, you know, we hate the British, stupid British colonial rule, but I realized that this was not actually an imposition. This was the lobbying of Sikhs to say that if you do not do this, there will be a revolt. And it will happen. So out of fear, the British implemented this act, and that was epic because Sikhs were now recognized as a distinct identity within British colonial India. Sikhs were not Hindus. And the act itself, the Anand Marriage Act, is very simple. It says something along the lines of, people who believe they're Sikhs, when they get married, are married as Sikhs. That's it. There's like a few lines, and you're just like, there's no underhanded, and it was written by Sikhs as well. So unlike other British colonial laws, this was brought in by the Sikh community. And perhaps the British, unaware of the political implications of what they were doing, by defining the fact that Sikhs actually exist. This outlines what would happen, what we would be talking about for a century later now. However, after independence, which in itself we can talk about forever, Article 25 of the Indian Constitution explicitly identifies Sikh, Jain, Buddhist traditions as sects of larger Hindu religion, and therefore all marriages involving members of the religious communities are officially performed under the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. However, since then, well, of course, Muslims have a separate marriage act, Hindus have a separate marriage act, Jains now have a separate marriage act, and Christians also have a separate marriage act. And we need to think that the absorption of the Sikhs is now a representation of the state apparatus to politically fold the Sikhs into the Hindu domination. Because if it wasn't such a big deal, why? Why have us in the fold? Why everyone else have separate marriage acts? But the Sikhs, you are so vehemently not allowing to have their own marriage act. Why? And again, the onus was then placed on the Sikh community to authenticate their identity and their autonomous nature. So these implications, consciously or not, become reflected in our social cultural traditions of Sikh marriage that are veering from Sikh tradition and spirituality. For example, there was a study done in 1983 by a Canadian, and she said she looked at the ways in which Sikhs, what rituals are found around Sikh marriage. And she said that largely Sikhs no longer stick to the tenets of Sikhi. And some of those examples are caste. She focused a lot on caste. And the very small percentage of Sikhs actually didn't follow the caste system when getting married. I don't need to go into the fact the gurus were so, and Sikhs are so against the elitist and hierarchy of the caste system, right? And she also noticed, which I thought was interesting, is that the formal proposal is supposed to come from the wife's side, or the bride's side. Because again, the implication is that the woman is the burden. So please, take this woman off our hands, because we can't afford her. And you're doing us a benti if you take her, right? And Gurbani clearly states, and Sikh tradition states, that it is equal parties coming together under, what is supposed to be a beautiful instance in your life. So the incorporation of patriarchal values allows for other aspects of the Hindu-dominant culture to permeate through Sikh marriage practices, despite the Sikh scriptures being explicitly clear in its stance against the subjugation of women. And again, dowry. And dowry is still present in the diaspora, and I find it shocking, right? And the Rahat Maryada denounces any custom that treats a daughter like an object or a piece of property and is passed from her husband and his family. But still, dowry is popular. And I find it interesting that when we do find or hear about families that are doing dowry exchanges, nobody actually speaks up against this. And when I say it in my family, they tell me to shut up and sit down and say, Bas Kalla, right? And I found a beautiful line that Guru Ram Das Ji wrote for the Lama, and it's in English. It's like, for my gifts and dowry, give me the presence of the omnipresent. Any other dowry presented by the self-oriented is deceptive, egotistical, and worthless. And so the Sikh marriage, the Sikh marriage tradition that was once revered for being simple, inexpensive, and accessible ceremony has become the exact opposite. Sorry. And when I was I was trying to see if something could counter, because I can speak from my general experiences of what a Sikh wedding looks like and what the traditions are, such as this. But I found a Sikh wedding website. And in it, they outlined dozens of rituals and traditions and customs, and only once mentioned, and then the bride and groom walk around the Guru Granth Sahib 4 times. Right? And they're like, so then you have to put the sara and the red ribbon that's supposed to ward off evil spirits, and the tilak, and then this and that, and the tail, and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I'm just like, none of this. There is no emphasis placed on the shabds. Anything, it seems so ridiculous. But then again, it's reflective of what we do every day. And even the wearing of the red, just food for thought of the wearing of the red. So, along with the violent exclusions that have been happening in the Indian state for the Sikh identity, this has worked to create a fixed identity for the for the Sikhs, sorry. And the state is a prime actor where there have been constitutional definitions of their identity. And the need to explicitly define a group that represents only 2% of your population, as is the case of Sikhs in India, raises suspicions to me. And especially when the state continues repressive policies specifically against populations that it denies the existence of, suspicious again. So why the need to violently eradicate a community that doesn't exist? And the act of the Indian state to create the Hindu Marriage Act, and sorry, I didn't mention, but creating the Hindu Marriage Act actually repealed the Anand Marriage Act. So to do the Hindu Marriage Act, they actively repealed the Anand Marriage Act. And the Christian Marriage Act that had been around from 1875 stayed the same. So it wasn't that they didn't want to keep British colonial law. It was a very active decision. And the act of the Indian state to create the Hindu Marriage Act shows an underlying weakness or fear of a community that cannot be adequately controlled simply through toleration and assimilation. It shows a need to absorb the community before the realization of perhaps the injustices that the community has faced at the hands of the state that can lend to the undermining of the facade that is created of inclusivity and equality. And so the discourse of assimilation needs to be understood as a political act of power, and that the Hindu Marriage Act served only as a part of an ideological state apparatus, and in years following, there has been incidences of mass violence, violent repression, as well as the denial of the importance of the main language of the Sikhs, Punjabi, and the exclusion of modern Sikh history from the education system, such as 1984. So this is where I bring in the diaspora. The diaspora is not policed as much as Sikhs in the Indian state. So the question is, Nikki Ganinder Kaur Singh says that the customs and values from Punjab, as Sikhs are a very transnational community, and non-Punjabi Sikhs, are quickly exported to diasporic communities across the globe. So have we as diasporic Sikhs taken the customs and traditions that became a part of, that came from Hindu-dominant hegemonic culture, and instead of questioning them, brought them with us, and then celebrated them? Oh, I'm almost done. So what are these implications? And so while we celebrate culture and downplay our political identity, but then outside get these petitions to recognize 1984, what are we saying about ourselves? So I think that in the diaspora, we can once again find a place of resistance in Sikh marriage, like we have seen many times over the last hundreds of years. So when the Sikhs in the diaspora are constantly negotiating their identities, as is a part of everyday life and every community that is migrating, we have this power where we can, in every instance, in the Gurdwara that is not as moderated as outside institutions, such as going to Congress and the House of Commons or Washington to ask them to recognize something. In the Gurdwaras ourselves, we can start raising questions. And by raising questions, by a simple act, by the optics of, for example, a woman walking in front of the man, or not doing this, walking around, or not wearing red, or not doing any of the extra customs, or not doing the ridiculous opulence, people who are there will start questioning and wondering why. Just like we don't question when somebody does dowry because you don't want to take away from their beautiful moment. They're not necessarily going to come up to the bride and groom and say, "What the hell were you doing? You didn't do this, this, and this." But they'll go home and they'll talk about it, right? So Sikh marriage can be that political institution, and we can move away from the capitalist understanding of the apolitical institution of marriage and go back to the call of the gurus to continue resisting oppression in every single aspect of our daily lives. So Sikhi would progress beyond the fixed identity as defined by states to a political identity that is based in the past, situates in the present, and moves to the future. Jakara.